It's our pleasure to welcome now the Secretary of State of the great state of Mississippi, Michael Watson. Mr. Secretary, what's going on today?
And I'm headed up to the Delta to visit with our friends at the Delta Council and talk a little bit about what the Secretary of State's office is doing on their behalf and out and about traveling today.
Gotcha. All right. Sounds like a good deal. So share with us your thoughts, if you would, sir, on the 2024 legislative session. How did you see it from the Secretary of State's perspective?
Well, I'll tell you, we had a couple of big pieces of legislation that didn't quite make it over the finish line. We talked about campaign finance reform, something that is very popular on the campaign trail, but unfortunately didn't make it across the line in the legislative session. But I was encouraged. There was a lot of good conversations that were had, and I think we made some progress with the right folks. That said, that'll be, again, one of our key pieces of legislation we push next year. The second piece that didn't make it across was our tidelands legislation. And that's something that really kind of folks' eyes glaze over who aren't from the coast, who don't understand the significance of tidelands to the state of Mississippi. We got, again, great conversations had there. We got really, really close towards the end, but it got hung up in some political crossfire. So I'm hoping we can get that moved through next year. That said, we've got a few cleanup pieces through the legislative process this year that I was really proud of. A couple of dealing with elections, a few dealing with some of our business services that we talk about quite often on this show. So overall, again, I think the two big pieces we were working on didn't quite make it, but I have some positive takeaways, and hopefully we can get those things done next year.
With respect to campaign finance reform, what do you hear as the objections? You've been working on this a while, and again, we can't seem to get it across the finish line. What do you hear from legislators? What's their aversion to this?
There are a few concerns, and again, sometimes folks just don't like change. Look, I know how to fill out my form now, and I can walk and hand it in, and I'm fine. There's a few things to deal with on that perspective when you talk about a statewide system. If you go to the FEC and you search the campaign finance reports, it's very easy, very, very searchable. And so our idea was, look, from the governor on down to the mayor to the city council member, everyone should have these forms online so Mississippians can search them. It's better for transparency, for clarity. And so some folks said, look, I don't have access to a computer to file my reports. That's not a good argument in 2024. And, I took that argument over to ethics when we had to file our ethics reports. And they said, this encompasses more individuals than just elected. They said we have all but maybe 20 or so that file online. So I know it's doable. And look, we got 20 folks out there that can't find a computer. We'll happily fill their form in for them online. But that's just not a great excuse nor argument against the idea of having an online filing report. That said, on that specific point, we were able to get $3.9 million this year for new systems at the Secretary of State's office, including our campaign finance reform system. So that's going to be in the process. The RFP goes out in June. Looking forward to getting that online and showing them the ease of use. And I think that's going to be helpful for us, but also helpful to Mississippians to be able to search and have really transparent interaction with campaign finance reports.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a little surprised to hear that in 2024, folks say they don't have access to a computer. Haven't been in the business for several decades. It's probably been at least a couple of decades since I've actually heard that from anybody. But that's a little surprising. But I, certainly respect whatever the situation is. But yeah, we got to do something. I think the people deserve more transparency and just more timely information as well.
Absolutely. And there was some pushback on the banning of pack-to-pack contributions. We saw, I think I mentioned to you, we saw about $10 billion that came in for various PACs and were shifted around, and that's how they try to wash. That's the term that's kind of used, try to wash that money so nobody can figure out where it exactly came from. There was some pushback there. There was a little bit of pushback on getting rid of the old money. We've talked about that, these legacy accounts where folks can basically take them home and use them as retirement accounts. The worst offender there being an account that has $1.9 billion in it. So there's some pushback there. Some folks thought that was a shot at the governor. It's not. It's just common sense that that money was not supposed to be used for retirement purposes. That money was supposed to be used for campaign purposes. So a few things there that were kind of sticking points. But, again, all in all, we had some good progress there, moving this under our office for the enforcement piece as well. A lot of questions were asked about that last year during the campaign when some glaring, what we thought were offenses came out and they weren't prosecuted. So a few pieces are still moving around there, but I think we've got a good plan, and we'll, again, go back to the legislature pushing that next year.
We got presidential elections coming up, of course, as you're well aware. Do you guys feel like you're ready for a big election?
Let me tell you this. I couldn't be more proud of my team, Kyle Kirkpatrick and the elections division, Liz Janis, our general counsel, Rob Pillow, our legislative guy, the work that we have done over the last few years to get Mississippi in even a better place, more transparency, more security, more belief in the system that we've put in place here in Mississippi. We're ready. That doesn't mean that there won't be questions asked, and I encourage all Mississippians to get trusted information. If you've got a question, call our office, or call your circuit clerk's office, or your local election commissioner's office. Don't take your information off of Facebook or Twitter or whatever your source of information is. Make sure when it comes to elections, you're getting trusted information. Very important. Especially, Gerard, when we see, like this executive order from the Biden administration and the efforts that the left is going to make to infiltrate our election system with voters that have no business being voters. They're ineligible, they're illegal. So I just encourage everybody to have their head on a swivel this year, watching what's going on with our elections process.
Any issues with our requirement to present a photo ID to vote in the state of Mississippi?
None whatsoever. Again, we have had great success with voter ID in Mississippi. Matter of fact, we've issued, I think, Gerard, the number is probably between 9,000 and 10,000 IDs to be used for voting. And I think that's the argument to really take away from the left. So not only did we offer free IDs, but we would take folks and get them transportation to the circuit clerk's office to get these IDs.
Right.
So it's been very easy to get IDs. It's been a seamless transition and really done, in my opinion, great work here in Mississippi of returning the confidence of making sure the person that walks into that precinct to vote is that actual person because they've got to present their ID.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We interviewed Shaq Taylor, who's now the head of the Democrat Party in the state, and he expressed some concerns about that as well, that there was just difficulty in obtaining a photo ID in Mississippi, but could we make it any easier?
That's horse manure, if you ask me. I think
Rhino, that's what he said, right? Yeah, Rhino's shaking his head. I want to make sure I accurately represented that part of the discussion, but go ahead.
That's absolutely ridiculous. It's easier than ever to register to vote in Mississippi. It's easier than ever to get an ID to use for the purposes of voter ID.
Yeah,
that's just useless chatter to drive up a narrative that doesn't exist.
First, can you hang around for another segment? I got some more stuff to talk to you about. We're about a minute away. Are you good?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure,
well, I was going to say this. You and I talk about this election integrity because it's a big part of what Secretary of State's office is charged with doing. Every time you come on, and I know you fought quite a bit since you've been Secretary of State, even while you were in the state Senate, to clean up the dang voter rolls, because inaccurate voter rolls are what leads to or open the door to any kind of election integrity problems we have. And I know we kind of share this common view, we as in Republicans, that, we send those guys up to Washington, they're just not getting anything done. One thing I think we have to recognize is that sometimes just standing in the gap against what the other party wants to do is actually accomplishing something, and the voting process is one of those issues. If Republicans were not in the gap in Washington, I know you're well aware of what Democrats would do to the voting process, the elections process in this country.
It would be a train wreck. It would be complete federalization of election process driven from the left. And that's not what we need. So I really appreciate the work that's been done in D.C. to stop H.R. 1, H.R. 5, and the various pushes from the federal government over the years to overtake the election process here in Mississippi from the federal level. It's just that's dangerous, not good for anybody.
We'll start with voter ID. That'd be gone. If they had their way, they'd outlaw that nationwide.
That's exactly right. And it's not just talk. That was in the legislation.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to step aside for a break. We appreciate you joining us today, Mr. Secretary. We'll come right back on the other side. And we got Mississippi Secretary of State Michael Watson on the line with us. Told us that he's traveling up to the Delta. The Delta Council, let's see, that's the big meeting next Friday. Is that right, Mr. Secretary?
That's exactly right. We're meeting with their officers today to, again, talk about some issues that are important to them. I think it's important for all of us, statewide elected officials as well as locally elected officials, to be accessible to the folks we work for.
Sure.
These are my bosses too, and so I want to hear from them to make sure we are working to make life and make government more accessible and efficient for them. Yeah,
great organization that does so much good for the Delta region of our state and in fact the entire state. So
such a special place.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So the legislative session as well. The question I have for you: when they get down to this fire drill, it seems, and you having been a part of that as a state senator, a lot of stuff happens in the last few days. In fact, the last few hours of the session before they gavel, sine die, and head out. But how exactly is your office funded? What's the appropriations process there?
Yeah, so we meet with, they've got clearly appropriations committees on both sides, and they have subcommittee chairs, and they have folks that are assigned to each agency. So we'll sit down with them in a subcommittee hearing typically. We'll walk through our budget, tell them, here's what's going on in our office, here's what we are using our funding for. And it's been fun for me because, they clearly know my conservative track record. So when I ask for something or when I tell them we don't need something, it's a pretty clear message that I'm not going to waste taxpayer dollars. So this is what we're using the money for. So that's kind of the process. It then goes to the bigger committee.
Okay.
And then at the end of the day, once the revenue numbers are kind of cemented, and they know exactly what the budget is going to look like overall, they start plugging those numbers in and backing them out from the bigger picture. So they'll get our numbers kind of squared away, and then, okay, well, what's left for other agencies? Or, we may be last, who knows? But typically that's kind of how it works.
Okay. So it's presented to the lawmakers as a proposal for your office. Is that fair to say?
That's right. So we'll send over a bunch of requests, and they kind of walk through it, and then the LBR meets and makes a recommendation. Meets and makes a recommendation. The LBR is what it's called.
Yeah.
And then you kind of work from those two numbers. What does the agency ask for? What is the legislative budget recommendation? What makes sense? And then how do we put this puzzle together at the end of the day?
Yeah. And, of course, the folks that are responsible for raising the money, the finance folks, the Ways and Means folks, they got to make sure we got the money to pay for it as well. That figures into the deliberations. But so where I was going with this is, have you seen situations like in particular this year where you would submit your request and that would get debated back and forth, and then they'd come up, as you said, LBO would produce the final LBR. Have you seen situations where you would end up with budgetary line items, spending line items that really weren't related to your office?
It's happened before. Again, at the end of the day, the legislature has the ability to do what they want.
Sure.
There are times when I think they see projects or they see, certain spending that they want someone to handle because they trust them to do the job that maybe that person didn't ask for it, but they know the product they're going to get if that individual is involved. So sometimes maybe you do see that in different agencies. I would say it's probably kind of rare. But again, I think when the legislature has a friend or has someone they trust that's going to do the job right, that's when they would put something that may tangentially be tied to their office.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't know if there would be things that are kind of earmarks or favors to certain legislators. You know how that sausage is made there. in the final appropriations negotiations, and they may just find places, I guess, to embed that sort of those individual line items other than in just that big spending bill.
Yeah, and that it cuts both ways. Sometimes, as you mentioned there, you get to that scramble at the end, and sometimes folks want to hide things. Sometimes folks want things to be more apparent.
Yeah.
It's easier to find something in a smaller bill than it is a bigger bill, or vice versa. So they have different reasons for different things. But again, that's the ability of legislators to appropriate dollars is one of the most important functions they have, but also one of the most important reasons for Mississippians to be engaged and to be watching what's coming out of those bills. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely agree. So, as you're well aware, the last 3 or 4 years, we've been in pretty good shape in terms of revenue versus spending. However, our support, or certainly the amount of revenue, I should say, that's being projected, up about 25% from where it was in 2019. So we're kind of trending that way. Now, we're able to cover that because we got enough money coming in. Of course, we don't spend it all. I think our legislature does a good job when they appropriate. They don't appropriate based on the amount of revenue estimated, right? So we end up, as we had the last 4 or 5 years, with a surplus, and that gets essentially transferred to multiple balance sheet accounts where it is invested, and we do produce a return on that. Sometimes there will be transfers out of those accounts, such as the case this year, to the Department of Transportation. Okay, so I think we lost the secretary. We'll see if he'll call us back. But we've got, let's see, a top-line spending or top-line revenue number this year, $7.9 billion, as I recall. We got him back? Did you catch that question, Mr. Secretary? I'm just trying to understand kind of how that process works. I know you've got experience with it, both from running Secretary of State's office and being a state senator. But we budget for a certain amount of revenue, and then we budget a certain amount of general fund support. But we've been fortunate the last 4 or 5 years where revenue has actually exceeded what we're appropriating.
That's right.
So,
and yeah, sometimes you will see when you've got that additional money, you've got certain holes that you want to fill.
Yeah.
And as we all know, transportation, roads and bridges, that's a core government function. So we've got to do, in my opinion, and they've done a great job of late, but we've got to do a better job of recurring funding going to transportation.
Yeah.
Roads and bridges are incredibly important. It drives commerce, safety. There's so many things that it ties to. But I would say this, and I'll kind of step back a little bit, Gerard. One of my things, and this is not a shot at the legislature, this is just me and the way that I see things a little bit differently sometimes. We as Republicans and as conservatives have not done a great job of cutting spending. I think we get kind of comfortable knowing the revenue is going to be there, so hey, let's just spend it all, as opposed to, wait a minute, what are the core functions that we should be funding, and what are the things that we shouldn't be funding, even in these good times. This is when it's really hard to make those cuts. But I would pose, the position that I think this is important. These are the times that you do make those cuts. Make sure that you can fund a tax cut of some sort. Continue to make sure that we're working on not a shoestring budget, but only the funds that we need to support the functions that government should be doing, as opposed to those that government has no business doing.
Yeah. It seems like maybe we could persuade the legislature to commission some deep dive analyses into all government agencies and all receivers and recipients, I should say, of government general fund spending, just to make sure that taxpayer money is being properly spent.
I agree, and I will say this. I'll give credit to Lieutenant Governor. He's done a good job in the conversation about the structure of government.
Yeah.
What are the things that we don't need? And if there are things that we don't need, then clearly that's going to be able to save us dollars for taxpayers, to turn back to taxpayers, because it's their money to start with, not government's money. But, we've got to have more of those conversations, and that's one of the things that I've tried to look at over the years. Look, let's drill down. What are the core functions that we should be doing? Is it going to cause folks to lose jobs? Absolutely. But if government shouldn't be doing it, government has no business doing it.
It's always been a pushback. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You know, that's always been the pushback. Anytime you talk about, of course, cutting government spending, generally speaking, that entails reduction of jobs. And boy, when that enters the discussion, it gets pretty dicey.
Yeah, it does. I remember back in, I think it was 2009, or 10, when the federal government was sending money in to supplant, I guess, some of the cuts that we had to make from the downturn.
Yeah.
And I was in a meeting with Governor Barber, and there were 7 or 8 of us, Republican senators over there, and he was going through kind of those dollars. And he said, look, we're going to be able to backfill these coffers here for these agencies. And
yeah.
I was still young, and it was Governor Barber, so it was a little intimidating. I kind of raised my hand and said, look, how many phone calls have you gotten from these agencies and from Mississippians that said they aren't receiving the services that they need? And he said, well, none. I said, well, then why are we giving this money back to these agencies?
Exactly. Well, we got to go. We appreciate you joining us. Be careful up there, man. Thanks.
You got it. Thanks, Gerard.
We're coming right back, folks, in the Element Wealth studio.